Good evening, I'm Peter Mansbridge from downtown Toronto. For the most part, an eerily dark Toronto.
Wow! Huples cat. There are many reasons why power can totally fail for millions of people. EMPs, strikes, hurricanes, ice storms, wildfires, floods, war, and human error. But if there was a sudden catastrophic power outage, how would it affect you, and could you get yourself home or in fact bug out from home?
Intense. A lot of wicked winds. With Katrina, we got about 2 feet of water. Fuck!
Most of this video is based on the 2003 August blackout that lost power for about 50 million people in eastern United States, central United States and central Canada for a period of 2 to 4 days. I was unaware of it. The power went out and I just thought the power had gone out because we lived rural and power goes out. When Kitty got to work, she called me and said, "Hey, the power's completely out everywhere." That got my spider sense tingling. I was not a prepper at that time, but I turned on my battery-powered radio and I heard what was going on. Almost immediately I found out that it was a power trip and power stations were offline and it would take a couple of days to get them back online. It wasn't a war, it wasn't the end of times. I wandered around in daylight and handed out flashlights to the few neighbours we had on our streets because none of them had flashlights. It wasn't a big deal. The most exciting thing from the whole thing was when I had a propane tank leak in the house whilst cooking food for the in-laws because I was a little drunk. The first thing to do is to recognise what's going on and react ASAP. Consider the following video and what would your moves be if you were in that position.
I'm videoing and it looks so cool.
YouTube.
Look at the jewelry boxes.
Get the jewelry cases, that's
Even the front of the building too, outside is
Yeah,
sign.
Oh, it's shooting me out.
Oh really?
It's like a disco party.
What the hell is going on?
Oh!
Fantastic.
So you're in Walmart and the lights are flickering. Why would you be in Walmart is another question, but you are. After a couple of seconds of realising that they're continuing to flicker, rather than grab your cell phone, wander deeper into the store and find it exciting, what you need to be doing is getting your flashlight out of your pockets because cell phones can fail and heading for the exits. Dump the stuff you were buying, give up your plans. Your goal is to get out of that building and into your car and home as fast as you can.
That we're seeing is cell phone usage. A lot of people are trying to use their cell phones and they've just been busy. They're really not working at all.
Try not to have plans of communication in an SHF based upon cell phone use. Sure, you can try text. That might not work either. If enough of the relay stations are out because of power and most have battery backup, the people around you are all going to be in 2021 on their cell phones. It's not going to be a guaranteed method of communication. Have a pre-written and a pre-understood plan of what everybody in your group is going to do in a situation like this and others, and ensure that they can do that and that they will do that.
Catastrophic transmission damage. Now they warn those in the hardest hit areas could experience power outages for weeks. This before and after shows an electrical tower toppled over. Phone service also out for many, and New Orleans 911 operations are experiencing technical difficulties.
Don't expect 911 to work. And don't expect, if you can get to an affected hospital, for that hospital to be able to do anything other than fail badly. Yes, most hospitals have generators. Yes, my hospital that I used to work at was on generator power for 5 days during an ice storm a few years ago. It can be done if it's very localized. If it's a massive area that's affected, national or international, there isn't going to be external help coming in, and what each individual hospital and fire station and police station have will rapidly be used up.
But we are seeing some of that famous American ingenuity when people are faced with adversity. People are getting together, they're finding people who are going to their same destination, and they're carpooling together. They are renting cars to try and get to where they need to go tonight. The mood here, really not too bad. People are trying to keep their sense of humor. They are starting to get a little frustrated, but they know that they just have to settle in for a long night until we hear some information. Brian?
Annie Rourke of WVIT. She is in New Haven for us tonight. We're looking at live pictures of what continues to be the human exodus off of the island of Manhattan tonight. They are headed across the very hot 59th Street Bridge. That is the very same location where we just spoke with Rahema Ellis. And note the common thread in so much of our coverage tonight: what is old is new again. Suddenly ferry boats are back in vogue. Trains are running on diesel engines. It's going to occur to someone to invent paper mail to make up for email, till they realize that's been around for a good long time as well.
This was in 2003. I would say in 2021, we are far less resilient and far less able to deal with this sort of thing.
Rahema Ellis, if you can still hear me, are you getting any stories out of the New York subway system? That, of course, has been the chief concern all day long. Thousands of people in long, dark tunnels with only the information from the PA, from the motorman of their trains.
Bus drivers and train drivers may well have radio communication. You need to listen to them. You want to get out of a subway as fast as you can. But you do want to follow the guard's advice in the subway system, because frankly you don't want to force your way out of the subway car and then the power comes back on.
The most immediate concern was for thousands believed to be stranded underground in the dark in the New York subway system or in elevators in skyscrapers.
Generally speaking, elevators, lifts, if you're in the United Kingdom, I would call them steel tombs. In any major event of huge proportions, if you're entrapped in one of those, you're not coming out. They're really hard to get out of. Every elevator entrapment in my hospital I go to and command to make sure various things are done and whatever. But we often need the fire services to break into the elevator, and trust me, it takes fire services sometimes 5 to 10 minutes to get the doors open. You're not getting out. Try not to use them. It's good for your health to use stairs, and you probably should use stairs more often.
All right, apparently we've lost touch with Rahema Ellis, things being what they are in New York. How about correspondent Robert Bazell on the streets of the city? Robert, are you with us? Not yet. We'll continue to tell you what we know. Again, a vast network of some major East Coast industrial capitals totally knocked out just after 4 o'clock Eastern Time this afternoon. And here in New York, we are coping with it with emergency generators, trying to get air to circulate and power to move through the wires that we have up and running. Detroit, Michigan, Toronto and Ottawa, Canada, Albany, New York, parts of the state of Connecticut, New Jersey, Akron, Ohio, to name some of the population centers hit by this.
Bear in mind that most of the people affected by this have no working TVs and no working radios, because batteries were rapidly used up and rapidly bought. I have a substantial stock of batteries in my home. I'm not going to run out of power for quite some time, even if I haven't switched at that point to solar. But for the majority of people, certainly people at work, they're going to run out of battery power very, very quickly. The TV and radio stations will work for a few days until they run out of gasoline for their generators. So it's useful to have a radio, and it's useful to be able to hear that the radio stations are operating. Initially, when the blackout happened, I couldn't find any news stations. It was just the normal stuff. But after about 20 minutes, they started broadcasting what was going on. If you have a radio, or if you have a cell phone, or even if your TV's working, and you're not picking up any channels whatsoever initially, like no channels are operating, this is either a nuclear EMP or a solar EMP, and this power outage is going to last for years. So right from the get-go, figure out Is this going to be short-term probably, or long-term almost definitely?
And Ashley, are you hearing any stories of people who have come out having either been trapped in elevators, subway cars, and the like?
A woman who actually walked down 60 floors just to get out of her building, not wanting to attempt the elevator, and we're hearing a lot of stories of people who've done that. We've not heard of anybody who was trapped in an elevator, but we've heard of people who heard people were trapped in elevators. It's very hard to know at this time.
Hearsay and rumours will spread real fast. Groups of like-minded neighbours will stand on street corners going on about it. Don't be that person. You have actions to take in this situation. Get on it. And that includes getting back home or moving to a bug-out location. You don't want to have to sit around speculating with people, and it includes watching TV. What's going on? If you have a family member who's disabled or too young, it's always a good idea to plop them in front of CNN, CNN, and get them to actually tell you if anything new happens whilst you get ready to evacuate. And evacuation, if you have to do so, should be as quickly as possible.
It's that with all of the lights out in Times Square and throughout this city, there's a grave concern for a lot of the managers and the store owners in that area that they'll be looting later on. And so they're boarding up a lot of their stores and closing their stores and trying to protect against what might happen in another hour and a half when night falls throughout New York City.
In 2003, generally right across the East, we actually knew what was going on because of radios. Enough people had battery-powered radios that people were aware of what was going on. There was generally very little looting, very little violence, and generally people got together. One of the most intriguing things in the downtown core of Toronto was a lot of the new condo owners only had electric can openers, and so we're actually wandering around trying to get can openers that were manual so they could open food that they had in their pantries. The other thing is that the hot dog stands and all of those things were pressed into service and used heavily by people as a source of food.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people who were not only overflowing the sidewalks but clogging the streets as well. Traffic police in Times Square were trying to just clear the people out of the streets so that cars, ambulances, and police cars could actually get through.
This is a waste of effort until evacuation, self-evacuation is completed. Yes, the police will try and keep the roads open. When you are faced with a major city where everybody's trying to get out of it, trying to keep corridors open is not going to be very effective. And that's something we're going to cover in the third video. How do you get home?
It was quite a mob scene, but you know, the surprising thing, most people taking it in stride, Brian, very different scene than 9/11. Not the panic, not the fear, lots of confusion, but clearly most people just annoyed more than anything else.
If people had found out that this power outage was caused by nuclear bombs falling elsewhere, I wouldn't expect great and good behavior. Right from the beginning, I would expect utter pandemonium and violence.
Where the lights are out. For that matter, they are out west to Cleveland, Ohio, and north to Ottawa, Canada, in a huge and history-making blackout. This was the scene when the lights went out, and by that we mean street lights, we mean Wall Street, subways, everything in this financial capital at the height of summer tourist season, say nothing of the huge, for hundreds of miles, stretches of land affected by this tonight. Dealing with the approach of darkness, but so far in New York, the opposite of panic in the streets. In fact, New Yorkers doing what they do like no one else in the world, getting along in a crisis. You have seen all kinds of examples so far today of people helping total strangers out of a jam. Tonight, they're helping each other out of the city. We are in the midst of what appears to be a colossal and history-making blackout.
People trapped in elevators and buildings. They have activated the emergency command center. Mayor Bloomberg's advice is to go straight home.
The subway system is down.
Ottawa is completely without power now.
In a lightning-quick domino series of failures.
Gotta go to the bathroom and you can't even go nowhere.
50 million people are thought to have lost power.
In 2003, a massive blackout struck major areas of the U.S. and Canada and was perceived as a wake-up call for the nation.
We've got a real crisis in our grid, and this is why, despite being a superpower, we have a grid that is comparable to a third world country, and that's not right.
Our grids aren't really that much better now, slightly better, but there's a lot more demand of power on the grid and it's a lot more variable. So I'm not expecting that this couldn't happen again. It could, and it wouldn't be a huge issue as long as you're not trapped in an elevator or dependent on life support. And most people now have battery backup for a few hours. 911's not working and you're on a ventilator. At home you're going to have to be bagged, and that won't go on for very long in August when it's very, very hot. Question for you lot, do you think the 2003 August blackout woke people up? Do you think people now generally have flashlights at work? Do you think people generally have water and food available to them? Do you think people generally now dress for walking when they go to work in the offices?
Power outage throughout much of the Northeast, both of the United States and of Canada.
Millions and millions of people were caught by surprise when the electrical grid suddenly crashed.
There'll be more on this in the third video, but don't be taken by surprise. Every day carry on your person a flashlight. Have that ready, have it ready to go. Don't be reliant on a cell phone. As a flashlight, it may or may not work, but I would argue that the cell phone is a very dependent on the grid technology, and a solar flare or a nuclear EMP is almost certain to scramble it out very quickly. So I would use a good old-fashioned, cheap, not an expensive flashlight. You should be wearing decent shoes and trousers. Generally speaking, you should have a bag in the car or in the office with decent gloves and extra food and extra water. You should have preparations in place to have to walk home. Don't expect to be able to use a taxi or a lift or the subway or the train. You may not have them available to you.
All of Cleveland's water supply runs on electric pumps.
My water commissioner said, the people in the Heights have water for 3 hours. I said, water? I thought the electric was out. He said, Mayor, how do you think the water gets from the lake to the people in the Heights?
You can get along in the dark, you can get along in the heat, but water becomes a health and safety issue very quickly.
Cleveland found out, with no electrical power, their taps failed in parts of Cleveland within 3 hours of the event, so by about 7:30 at night. Now bear in mind that the power was out for several days. It was a localized area of Cleveland. They were able to bring in water and all the rest of the stuff because society was still functioning, because it was a localized large event, not a war event, not a super volcanic event. In those types of scenario, the taps are going to stay dry for a long time, if not forever. Make sure you have enough water on hand for everybody for at least 2 weeks. I would argue 4 weeks. And make sure that you have food that you don't have to cook. Make sure if you can cook it, you're not going to attract other people who want your food. Be very cautious about the preps you take. Make sure your preps are as pre-industrial as you can make them, as less dependent on power as you possibly can. If your preps are dependent on pulling out a gasoline generator, if your preps are dependent on the solar panels on your roof, they can fail in a total power outage depending on the cause. You really want to make sure that you don't need a lot of power to be reasonably comfortable, and you want to make darn sure that you know how to get home from wherever you might be if the power goes out. Well, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, feel free to give me a thumbs up for my ego, or you can give me a subscription and you can enter my wacky world of my channel. But what I will say is you do need to take this kind of stuff seriously, and it's not serious when people are talking about having lots of generators and solar panels and all the latest gizmos and all that stuff. It's got to be small scale, it's got to be useful, it's got to be reliable, and you've got to be able to carry it. Far too many preppers out there are telling people to overstock and oversupply for bug outs and forget home trips. Really a bad idea. Wait is time. You want to get home as fast as possible. You want to be ahead of the curve. As you've seen in these videos, people had bicycles. They couldn't ride them. There was no room to ride the bicycle. There is a way around this, and I will explain that in the third video. But if this happens to you, you're not going to be taken by surprise, and you're easily going to be able to get a source of light. Light's important, both for signaling and also for finding your way. It's quite bright in here. This is a solar BioLight, and it's very reliable, and I've had it for quite a few years. It's also a bit of a disco light. Red's always useful. Nice green light. And the white light. Toodles!
Employee had gone to lunch and forgot to turn back on the tool that monitored grid problems.
This was a Wolfie Terrier in the Dark production 2021.